Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I am here today with a very special guest, Grant Hagen, recent book reader of The Old Gringo by Carlos Fuentes. Grant, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great. How are
Excellent,
you?
excellent. What could you tell me? Let's start with the author. What can you tell me about the author?
Okay, Carlos Fuentes is one of the most celebrated novelists in the history of Mexican literature. He was born in Panama, but he moved to Mexico at a young age, and he also spent some time living in Washington, D.C., where he learned English. This book was written in Spanish, but he did have the ability to write in English as well.
Excellent. Why don't you give us a brief synopsis of what you read in that book?
Okay, well, The Old Gringo is about, believe it or not, an old gringo who comes into Mexico at the time in the early 1900s when there's a revolution going on in the country, and he's had some recent tragedies in his life and his family, so he decides to come to Mexico to fight in the revolution in the hopes that he'll die at some point. And he meets a young woman named Harriet Winslow, who they develop sort of a father-daughter relationship, and the book sort of revolves around them and their interactions with the Mexican general Tomas Arroyo.
Excellent. Next, I think we'll talk about some major issues. What major issues did you see in this book that were portrayed?
A primary issue I saw revolved around the revolution that was taking place in Mexico and sort of the unequal distribution of power. You had the poor people working for the rich upper class, which was a minority of the people in Mexico, and you just sort of see the struggle for power in the view of the lower classes during this point in history. Another major point that the novel raises has to do with sort of the issue of Marxism and communism. Fuentes himself was a professed Marxist, and you can just sort of see his views of Marxism expressed in the attitudes of the Mexicans in the novel and their view regarding society and the economy.
Very good. You started doing this a little bit earlier, but why don't you just state it again, what the historical context was? You got into it a little bit with the Revolutionary War and such, but
Sure.
Why don't you just explain a little bit more?
Yep, so as I said before, it takes place during the Mexican Revolution in the early 20th century. This revolution was led by a man named Pancho Villa, who was a crazy but also brave Mexican who fought for what he thought was right. And he doesn't play a big part in the book, but towards the end he does I won't spoil it, but he plays a major role in the outcome of the book. But that's sort of the historical context of it.
Excellent. And just to close today, let's talk about the critical reception of the book and then your personal thoughts on the book.
Sure. I found a review by the New York Times from when this book first came out, which was in the 1980s, and the reviewer said that he thought that Fuentes didn't do a great job of developing his characters and that the reader doesn't really get a good sense of the whole story behind the characters in the book. But I think that my personal opinion is that sort of plays hand in hand with what Fuentes was going for, and that he wanted to sort of make the characters more symbolic. I personally really enjoyed reading the novel. It did have a lot of explicit sexual situations, especially towards the end of the book. But I thought overall the plot was pretty captivating, and it was a pretty quick and easy read.
Excellent. Well, Grant, appreciate it. Thanks for your time, and look forward to hearing from you again.
Thank you.